Further points of archaeology that corroborate the Bible. I haven't run across any points of archaeology that absolutely contradict the Bible. Absence of information to be discovered later, which so often has happened. About the Hittite civilization. Oh, the Bible's wrong. All of a sudden, there it is. Because Abraham is honored by both Christianity and Islam, it is interesting to look at the archaeological evidence concerning his time, which is now coming to light in the 20th century. What we find is that archaeology clearly places Abraham in Palestine and not in Arabia. Abraham's name appears in Babylonia as a personal name at the very period of the patriarchs, though the critics believed he was a fictitious character who was redacted back by the later Israelites. That was the idea, until they found something, and then they're quiet and they find something else. The field of Abram in Hebron is mentioned in 918 BC by the Pharaoh Shishak of Egypt, now also believed to be Ramases II. He had just finished warring in Palestine and inscribed on the walls of his temple at Karnak the name of the great patriarch, proving that even at this early date Abraham was known not in Arabia, as Muslims contend, but in Palestine, the land the Bible places him. C. The Beni Hassan tomb from the Abrahamic period depicts Asiatics coming to Egypt during a famine, corresponding with the biblical account of the plight of the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And there is further archaeology evidence which supports other biblical accounts, such as D. The doors of Sodom, Tel Beit Mirsim, dated to between 2200-1600 BC, are heavy doors needed for security, the same doors which we find in Genesis 19:9. Yet, if this account had been written between 900 to 600 BC, as the critics previously claimed, we would have read about arches and curtains, because security was no longer such a concern then. E. Joseph's price as a slave was 20 shekels, Genesis 37:28, which, according to trade tablets from that period, is the correct price for 1700 BC. An earlier account would have been cheaper, while a later account would have been more expensive. F. Joseph's tomb, Joshua 24:32, has possibly been found in Shechem, as in the find there is a mummy, and next to the mummy sits an Egyptian official's sword. An apostrophe in there. Is this mere coincidence? Jericho's excavation showed that the walls fell outwards, echoing Joshua 6:20, enabling the attackers to climb over and into the town. Yet, according to the laws of physics, walls of towns always fall inwards. A later redactor would certainly have not made such an obvious mistake unless he was an eyewitness, as Joshua was. G. David's capture of Jerusalem, recounted in 2 Samuel 5:6-8 and 1 Chronicles 11:6, speak of Joab using water shafts built by the Jebusites to surprise them and defeat them. Historians had assumed these were simply legendary until archaeological excavations by McAllister, Duncan, Kenyon on Opal now have found these very water shafts. Another new and exciting archaeological research is that which has been carried out by British Egyptologist David Roll. Until a few years ago, we only had archaeological evidence for the patriarchal, Davidic, and New Testament periods, but little to none for the Mosaic period. Yet one would expect much data on this period due to the cataclysmic events that occurred during that time. David Roll, in A Test of Time, has given us a possible reason why, and it is rather simple. It seems that we had simply been off in our dates by almost 300 years. By redacting the pharaonic lists in Egypt, he has been able to now identify the abandoned city of the Israelites' slaves, called Avaris, the death pits from the 10th plague, and Joseph's original tomb and home. There remain many tells yet to uncover. 7. Summary and conclusions. Ray, the support from archaeology. In every period of Old Testament history, we find that there is good evidence from archaeology that the Scriptures speak the truth. In many instances, the Scriptures even reflect first-hand knowledge of the times and customs it describes. While many have doubted the accuracy of the Bible, time and continued research have consistently demonstrated that the Word of God is better informed than its critics. In fact, while thousands of finds from the ancient world support in broad outline and often in detail the biblical picture, not one incontrovertible find has ever contradicted the Bible. I begin on that. So, incontrovertible. You can have guesstimates of one thing or another, but no evidence. Point D, documentary confirmation of the Old Testament accounts relative to corroborating the Old Testament's historicity. Not only do we have accurate copies of the Old Testament, as we find remarkable, but the contents of the manuscripts are historically reliable. William F. Albright, known for his reputation as one of the great archaeologists, states, "There can be no doubt that archaeology has confirmed the substantial historicity of Old Testament tradition." Professor H. Rowley, fix Donald here, cited by Donald F. Wiseman in Revelation in the Bible, claims that it is not because scholars of today begin with more conservative presuppositions than their predecessors that they have a much greater respect for the patriarchal stories than was formerly common, but because the evidence warrants it. Beryl Unger summarizes, Old Testament archaeology has rediscovered whole nations, resurrected important peoples, and in a most astonishing manner filled in historical gaps, adding immeasurably to the knowledge of biblical backgrounds. New discoveries continue to confirm the historical accuracy or the literary antiquity of detail after detail in it, the Pentateuch. It is accordingly sheer hypercriticism to deny the substantially Mosaic character of the Pentateuchal tradition. Sir Frederick Kenyon says it is therefore legitimate to say that, in respect of that part of the Old Testament against which the disintegrating criticism of the last half of the 19th century was chiefly directed, the evidence of archaeology has been to reestablish its authority and likewise to augment its value by rendering it more intelligible through a fuller knowledge of its background and setting. Archaeology, Archaeology has not yet said its last word, but the results already achieved confirm what faith would suggest, that the Bible can do nothing but gain from an increase of knowledge. Archaeology has produced an abundance of evidence to substantiate the correctness of our Masoretic text. Bernard Ram writes of the Jeremiah seal. Archaeology has also given us evidence as to the substantial accuracy of our Masoretic text. The Jeremiah seal, a seal used to stamp that bitumen seals of wine jars, and dated from the 1st or 2nd century A.D., has Jeremiah 48:11 stamped on it, and in general conforms to the Masoretic text. This seal attests to the accuracy with which the text was transmitted between the time when the seal was made and the time when the manuscript was written. Furthermore, the Roberts Papyrus, which dates to the 2nd century B.C., and the Nash Papyrus, dated by Albright before 100 B.C., confirm our Masoretic text. Archaeologist Albright writes concerning the accuracy of the scriptures, as a result of archaeology, new discoveries continue to confirm the historical accuracy or the literary antiquity of detail after detail in the Pentateuch. Albright comments on what the critics used to say. Until recently, it was the fashion among biblical historians to treat the patriarchal sagas of Genesis as though they were artificial creations of Israelite scribes of the divided monarchy, or tales told by imaginative rhapsodists around Israelite campfires during the centuries following their occupation of the country. Eminent names among scholars can be cited for regarding every item of Genesis 11 through 50, chapters 11 through 50, as reflecting late invention, or at least retrojection of events and conditions under the monarchy into the remote past, about which nothing was thought to have been really known to the writers of later days. Bad history, all these days of criticism, was taken for granted, and then archaeological evidence comes to refute it, and all of a sudden we have bad history kind of disappearing. But they're still in the history books, and sometimes people still go with it, even though they've been refuted by other books coming on later. Now it has all been changed, says Albright. Archaeological discoveries since 1925 have changed all this. Aside from a few diehards among older scholars, as I mentioned, there is scarcely a single biblical historian who has not been impressed by the rapid accumulation of data supporting the substantial historicity of patriarchal tradition. According to the traditions of Genesis, the ancestors of Israel were closely related to the semi-nomadic peoples of Transjordan, Syria, the Euphrates Basin, and North Arabia in the last centuries of the 2nd millennium BC and the first centuries of the 1st millennium. So, Miller Burroughs continues, to see the situation clearly, we must distinguish two kinds of confirmation, general and specific. General confirmation is a matter of compatibility without definite corroboration of particular points. Much of what has already been discussed as explanation and illustration may be regarded as general confirmation. No particular points of contradiction, plausibility, rather than specific points. The picture fits the frame, the melody and the accompaniment are harmonious. The force of such evidence is cumulative. The more we find that items in the picture of the past presented by the Bible, even though not directly attested to, are compatible with what we know from archaeology, the stronger is our impression of general authenticity. Mere legend or fiction would inevitably betray itself by anachronisms and incongruities. That's the point. Finding absolute incongruities and absolute anachronisms is one thing, but when it generally is harmonious with the period of time that the Bible indicates, then we have confirmation.